Welcome back to Thrive Yoga Fit Transformational Coaching. This is Erin. So today I have a special guest, Timber Hawkeye. Many of you know him that listen to my podcast, and also people who have been to my studio, you would know. But if you don't, he's awesome. Timber Hawkeye is a best-selling author of Buddhist Boot Camp, Faithfully Religionless, and the Opposite of Namaste. His books and the Buddhist Boot Camp podcast offer a secular mindfulness practice to be at peace with the world, both within and around us. And his intention is to awaken, enlighten, enrich, and inspire. Hi, Timber.
Aloha.
How is the book tour going? I got to be a little part of that, which was exciting.
You did. It was really great to be in your studio, and I'm extremely grateful you hosted us. It was a wonderful turnout and really good energy in the room. And I was doing 65 cities in 90 days. So even though much of it is a blur, your studio stands out as one of the more memorable conversations, just because it was a really great group and very, very warm welcome in your studio. So thank you for that. And the goal was to get out of the East Coast before winter hit, and I did, and to finish with the West Coast before Christmas hit, and I did. And my next leg is New Zealand, Australia, and the UK, which is starting in a couple of weeks.
Oh, that's exciting. So I am fascinated by how you go through that process, right? Because you couch surf pretty much, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So you've probably been on some very interesting couches.
Oh, yes. The concept behind it is that everyone has a couch that sleeps alone in the dark every night. And that couch can be someone's bed, someone who's traveling the world on a budget. And I can't justify the expense of staying in hotels while I do this, when that money can go towards buying books for prisons and schools and veteran support programs. So I just put myself out there, and, it's typically just 1 or 2 nights, and it's doable. And some places are really nice and some places are less so, but all places they're just temporary. And it's a very humbling experience, and people feel very grateful to even have the opportunity to offer that level and form of generosity. Because oftentimes people think of generosity, they think, well, I can't give you any money. I'm like, you don't need to. There are so many ways to contribute in ways that may seem no big deal to you, but it makes a world of a difference in someone else's life.
Yeah, I know Diana was very excited to host you. She was like,
she was actually excited to have me stay there. See what I mean? It's not even a burden. People want me to stay longer. So it's definitely a mutual relationship. She was great.
Thank you. So the experience of doing that, now, did you do this with your other books as far as on a book tour, just kind of couch? So that's just kind of your way.
It is very much in line with my intention. When Buddhist Boot Camp was first published, I didn't think anyone was going to read it. I didn't know what was going to come of it. I basically took my friend's dare to publish my letters to her because she thought people would find it inspirational, and turns out she was right. And I'm very aware there's nothing in the book that people don't already know. There's nothing in there that's of me. It's ancient teachings that I have merely translated into a language that people today can go beyond understanding to actually implementing into their daily lives. So I take no ownership of it. So I immediately decided not to personally benefit from the proceeds from the book. And so anything the book makes goes right back to supporting the book. So from the very first book tour, this was part of, if you want to call it, my business model, even though it's not really, it's not a way to run a business, but it's definitely a way to operate in line with my values and my intentions. So yeah, you can imagine me showing up, giving a talk about mindfulness and awareness and minimalism and defining what enough means to you. And, just doing that and then going outside and getting into a Bentley and driving away, there would be some incongruence. Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying anything wrong with Bentleys. I'm a car guy and I do love cars. It's just, it wouldn't be in alignment with what I just said. And I do believe that happiness is what you think, say, and do are all in harmony. So it is, from the very beginning, as you said, part of how I do the tours and everything else.
I do. Many things to love about you, as one of your listeners, but also like there's a whole like community of people that kind of surround you with their love. And it's really wonderful that you get to experience that on those book tours. I wanted to ask, just as someone who I have my own spiritual practices that kind of help to keep me grounded so I don't go, up into my mind too much and just kind of like, pull into my body. When you're touring, like, how do you keep up some of your own practices? And maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing what those are that help to draw you back into yourself so that you can, channel this information without like getting egoic about it or like, so that you can stay, the vessel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I said it earlier too, that I'm not ever under the impression that I'm saying anything we don't already know. I'm reminding people and thereby reminding myself of what we tend to forget. So I'm very constant in touch with, the fact that this isn't of me. I didn't come up with any of this. And unlike you, I do get into my head intentionally. And because there's where things make sense to me. What drew me to Buddhism wasn't any of the holistic stuff or the traditional or ceremonial aspects of it, or it was 100% pure logic. It just made rational sense to me. And that's where I go back to. And even when people say, "Oh, I loved your message and I was like, and you're so wise." I'm like, this isn't my message. I am just delivering an ancient stuff. And so when people say that, I hear that and I say, thank you. But I know what they're saying is I love the message, and I get it because I love the message. In fact, I love the message so much that when I received it, I couldn't imagine not sharing it with others. It would actually imply I didn't actually get the message. Right. So I just need to get out of the way. And the way I do that is a lot of solitude. The energy in the rooms is wonderful. And it's really great to be there and take it all in and give it all out. And then immediately when that's done, and you can even ask Diana, all I need is just a quiet, warm room and just a lot of alone time. So people think the most exhausting part of the book tour are the 8 and 10 hour drives between events. And it's not. That's actually the highlight. That's when I recharge. The exhausting part is the actual hour and a half of speaking and interacting. And then I recharge by being alone in the car in complete silence. Just that's how I recharge. That's my practice. And while it's not great to sit in the car for 10 hours straight, I'm speaking to a yogi, I'm very aware of that, without getting up and stretching. Again, it's very temporary. And so I know that when I get to finish that, then I'll go on big hikes and be back out in nature, and it's balance. And I think balance isn't something we find one day. People say, I'm trying to find balance. I'm like, it's not lost. You just have to create it. And so I create the balance between being around so many people to being alone, from being indoors to being outside in the sun. That's my balance.
I love that. And that's kind of a message to me probably too, as well as our listeners. It's, I used to consider myself an extrovert, and it's like the longer I stay on the spiritual path and, I teach public yoga classes, I run a studio, like I do podcasts and all these things, and I'm an author. It's like I crave the solitude because I've made that connection with myself, like the one that you're speaking of, the solitude, like that. Like, I guess I could say I understand why yogis would go out into caves now, like now that I'm a little bit further along. I guess what I want to ask is it challenging with relationships and friendships and things, because you are on this spiritual path, obviously, and inspiring like thousands of people along your way, like, for your, I guess, to nourish that like humanness, as far as connection, is it challenging because you crave more solitude?
It's only challenging And I think it works in either direction when people expect me to be anything other than who I am. So if an extrovert's like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you loud? It would be the same as me going, what's wrong with you? Why are you so loud? So the friendships I have are with people who understand my need for solitude, and they don't take it personally. And, there are so many ways to be intimate with people that does not involve even being or sharing a physical space with them. So while this is a very isolating decision, to me, isolation is not deprivation. In fact, if I was around a bunch of people all the time and always out, I would feel deprived of what nourishes me. So extroverts generally are recharged when they're around other people, and introverts recharge when they're alone. And so it's not one or the other. It's it's just like when your cell phone battery is about to run low. It's like, okay, I need to go and recharge that. And so some people recharge by, I need to go out, be with my friends and hug a bunch of people. And, I do that for 5 minutes and my battery's done, and what I need is then to be recharged overnight. And then I can do that for another 5 minutes or so. So there's no right or wrong, or this is the way to do it, or because you're on a spiritual path. I mean, there are many yogis out there who thrive on being around people and in the rooms and get the energy, and they just feed off of it. And that's how they recharge. And that's great. And then there are those of us who just, and that could be, I'm so reluctant to label it as introvert or extrovert or put it under the umbrella of neurodivergence. And it's the way I've always been. So it has nothing to do with being on a spiritual path or not, because I wasn't born a monk. It was a decision I made later in life. But neurodivergence has been there all along. I've been very much in my head and not understanding why people need to recharge the way they do. And now when I understand it, it doesn't feel wrong or right. It's just different and
neutral.
Yeah, very. Yeah.
As the world is. What is your favorite part about what you do, like as a whole, like from the writing to the book tours to I'm
going to go with my impulse gut reaction when I close my eyes and I think of when do I feel most connected with my intention, my vision, and my mission. It's probably when I speak in prisons, not to throw shade at speaking at yoga studios or bookstores or any of that. There's value in that too. There's something very rich about sitting with people who have done nothing other than sit with their own thoughts, because that's why they're in correctional facilities, and our intention is to bring the correction back into correctional facilities. And so part of that is to do a lot of introspection and look within and figure out, okay, where did I sidestep, and how can I now change the way my brain works so that in the future, when I'm triggered, I don't react, I respond, and I own my own feelings, and I don't blame other people for what's going on with me. And and I'm not talking about Gen Pop, like the general population out of prison. There's oftentimes we work with groups of people within the facilities who have said, okay, I'm here and I can spend my entire time here, whether it's my entire life or the next 20 years, angry, afraid, and alone, or I could spend it looking within and actually trying to change who I am as an individual. And so the reason you said what is my favorite, so to speak, it's because immediately I'm around people who are not distracted by their job or their families or their kids or their to-do list or their, grocery shopping. Basically, the system has taken all of that guesswork out of the place so that they can do one thing and one thing only, which is work on themselves. And that to me is so rich. And then I speak elsewhere, and it's very surprising to me that in prison, I hear many of the people there say they feel so free and grateful to be there to redefine who they are. They have all the time in the world to figure out, who, I don't know, the fact that they tell me they feel free behind bars, and then when I speak at yoga studios or elsewhere and people say I feel so stuck, is just directly indicative of the fact that the prison is really in our own heads, and we're the ones with the key. And so that's why that's my favorite, because everywhere I go, the light bulb's already on. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, we get it. And outside, people are still in the dark, like scrambling, trying to find the light switch. There's benefit to both. But if I had to, and you asked me to pick what is my favorite, that is when people are engaged. Because on the outside, people are like, they're interested in maybe finding that light switch, but they're also reluctant to flick it on because there's comfort in the darkness. It's all they've ever known. And they're just going by gut, or they're going by tradition or cultural expectations or whatever. And when you turn on the light, you may see things you don't like, your own reflection, for one. And so if you're not ready to see it, sometimes people do flick the light and they go, oh, shoot, I need to turn that back off.
Turn it off.
Exactly. My favorite book review is from someone who said, I love your books. I throw them across the room a dozen times, because it's like, they're great, but they're also forcing you to look at parts of you that you spent most of your life trying not to see. So it's a very long answer, but I think that,
oh, it's wonderful.
I would go as far as to say that it's not even specific, because sometimes I have that connection with people outside of prison, and sometimes I don't. So it's not even the prison; it's the people who are not imprisoned. How's that? Whether they're in prison or not, it's the people who are not in prison. That's my favorite part.
That's wonderful, and a perfect segue into one of the main topics I wanted to talk about, which was working with people in the prison system. So I wanted to ask this because I have received many letters from people who are in different prison systems. For some reason, Arizona is like a big one for me. I don't know. My podcast is a hit there. But how did you start that work? And were you ever intimidated? Did you have obstacles? And I asked partly because that is something I'm weighing out as something like, I want to be of service to these people. And like, they poured their hearts out to me in letters that I received. I guess, my situation's a little bit different because I'm a woman. I'm a little bit more, I don't know, I guess cautious, but I wanted to hear, I guess, your experience as far as like, how did you start doing that work? And then like, were there obstacles, or was there any intimidation?
When the book first came out and people started, reading it and it started getting traction, I made a commitment to never go where I'm not invited. And so people, when you ask, like, how did you start that? I'm like, I didn't. I never reached out to a prison and said, hey, I want to speak in your prison. I've never done that. I only accept invitations. So even at the yoga studio, I don't reach out and say, hey, can I speak at your yoga studio? Someone from the studio reaches out to me and said, we know you're on tour. We'd love for you to stop by. Sure. And then I say yes. And so if a chaplain from a prison says, hey, we have a program, we want to use your books. Yes, here they are. They're free. There's no cost to you. This is why I do what I do. What do you need? Would you come and speak to us? Yes. Can we do anything? Nope. Just tell me where and when, and I'll be there, and the obstacles I have encountered, there is a lot of red tape. For example, sending books to prisons. And the first book is only in hardcover. Yep. And they don't allow hardcovers in most schools. So in prisons. So we created it's a two-step process. There's also, you have to be approved, like an approved vendor or whatever their wording is, to send books to prisons. Like it has to, there's a whole pre-approval process, and you have to develop a relationship, and there's a contract, and there's a form that you fill out.
I'm going through that now. So yeah, all this is.
And so I didn't mess with, I don't want to recreate the wheel. The prison library project is already in existence. They receive 300 letters a week from inmates all over the country asking for books like this. And so I said, why go through all of that, put more on my plate, make my life harder? And in this, because remember, all of this was formed out of the intention to live a simple and uncomplicated life. So why would I complicate my life more by taking on what a system that someone's already put in place? So at first, the prison library project said, hey, can you send us a dozen books? And then they're like, we ran out. Can you send us more? And I'm like, you know what? Here's I'm just going to send them to you. And you just, when you run low, you just let me know and I'll just replenish your supply. And we've done that with all 3 books now. We've created a paperback edition of all 3 books specifically for prisons. There's another one for nonprofits that goes to the Veteran Health Administration. It goes to the Mental Health Association to help people in recovery. And it's all designed specifically to not go where I'm not invited. Like I can't stress that enough. None of this is of me. I don't show up and say, you need to hear what I have to say. Absolutely not. It's always when someone says, hey, I run a nonprofit for battered women. Will you send us some books? Give me the address. You don't need, there's nothing else you need to say. It's because, again, being of service, what does that mean? It means not knowing what being of service is going to look like. When I took the monastic vows, I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I said, I want to be of service. And every day it shows up differently. And my job is to say yes, so long as being of service is in line with my values. And so regardless of how much I may think someone would benefit from reading the book, I would never give them the book and say, you need to read this. That, as far as nonviolent communication goes, that's called unsolicited advice. And that's a form of bullying
and violence.
And absolutely. And so it's just like AA. It's not for people who need it, unfortunately. It's for people who want it. So you can't tell someone you need this. When they are ready, they'll want nothing more than that. So the obstacles I've encountered are the red tape of working within a system that is inherently broken, and I can try to spend the rest of my life trying to fix the system or find a way to work with it. As far as safety, I have never felt unsafe. I think the first few times in prisons, there's just like all the movies play in your head of what you think it would be like, and it's you're always surrounded by the most, in my experience, loving and gentle and kind and well-intended, not just, I mean, the harshest and most rigid are the personnel, not the inmates. It's the system itself that is very hard and cold. My experience is the people on the inside have softened so much and are so gracious. There's just, I can go on and on. It's just how there's never been any reluctance once I was there. It's the getting there. It's the red tape. It's the bureaucracy. It's the paperwork that I'm really grateful because I'm invited and I don't invite myself. Most of the time, the local chaplains do it. They just, it's like, hey, can you sign this? We just need to get clearance. And I just did this because I'm doing a book tour around the UK, and they invited me to speak at a prison in the UK because they used my books as part of their program. Sure. Tell me where to sign. What do you need from me for clearance? And I just send it to them and they do it. So maybe I'm speaking from a very privileged place of never having to create the wheel, but just tapping into what system is already in place and how can I just tag along, because they're desperate for more people to engage, and most people just don't know how. And so and many of the, because I work in prisons where they have like the Transformation Yoga Project. They don't just teach yoga in prisons, they do yoga teacher training so that the residents become yoga instructors, and those who get out do so certified. Those who are there for life become the local resident
beautiful
yoga instructor. And many of the instructors who go and they teach, they're female, and I would say speak to them about, because I can't tell you what it's like for a woman to walk into an all-male prison. I would say speak to them. I'm not going to pretend to know.
Yeah.
Is that a fair answer? I mean, it's the only one I've got.
That's fair, and I've been asked at one place in Arizona, so I might, pursue that. I kind of wanted to talk to you and see your experience, but like, it is so wonderful as teachers when you have students that are so ready to receive the teachings and just so open to it. And, like you said, the humbleness takes the ego out of the equation, and they're ready for that spiritual nutrition. And so it's like, yeah, like you said, you've been invited, like they pulled you in, they're ready to hear and taking the lesson.
It's not me they want to see, it's the message they want to hear.
It's a message.
So
I'm the message.
Absolutely. I mean, think of it. I was a paper boy when I was a teenager, and this just came in mind. And I would ride around my bike around San Francisco, and I would throw the paper. This is way back in the day. People who are listening to this who are young are like, "What's a newspaper?" But and sometimes I would pull up to a house, and people would be so happy to see me. They're not happy to see me. They're happy to get the paper. It's like when the UPS guy shows up at your door. They're delivering a package that you're not, maybe you're personally happy to see the UPS delivery person, but more likely you're just happy about the package that's arriving. Right. So that's how I think of myself. Like, I'm delivering something that someone is very excited for. And I just happen to be the person dropping it off. Even when people are like, "Oh my God, you're amazing." I'm like, and I've said that to the UPS person too. So, I'm like, "Thank you so much for showing up early. I thought it won't be here till 7.
I love you.
Right. Exactly. And hopefully they get it. Like, it's not me they love. That just happens to be on my route. And I just, it's just, people thank me all the time. Like, "Thank you so much for being here." And I'm like, "Thank you." I mean, if I showed up and you weren't here, that would really suck. So it's very reciprocated. It's very mutual. You've been invited. Go do it. Do speak with other yogis who've done it, and just say, "What's your experience been like?" And it's sometimes some of it's going to be good, some of it's going to be bad. It's like the couches I crash on. There's no one answer. It's all over the place. And at the end of the day, I still do it. So it must work.
Thank you. Thank you. I received that. So I wanted to kind of switch direction just a little bit. So my podcast used to be called Thriving After Addiction for a reason. I'm in recovery. And, I found that, like a lot of people in recovery, there are many things that you're recovering from, as far as like releasing your attachments to, food, alcohol, drug, like scrolling. And I actually listened to your one of your most recent podcasts about reflection. And you were talking a little bit about, it was the one, coping mechanisms, maybe. And I didn't know this little piece about you, is that you used to struggle with eating a little bit. So I thought, I always like to hear different perspectives, because for me, I was bulimic for 12 years and that just consumed me. It's like anyone who's had an eating disorder, it's like, it just becomes your world and that's all you can focus on and obsess about. But there's different layers to healing. And so when I hear of someone that has struggled with some sort of compulsive behavior or some sort of addiction, I always like to hear kind of like, okay, what was your process as far as, becoming aware of that, and then the process of like that pause maybe, and then making a different decision. So I wanted to hear that from you. I thought that would be helpful for people listening.
Thank you. We tend to think of the drinking as being the problem, the eating as being the problem, the bulimia as being the problem. And from the person who's going through it, from their experience, those are solutions, and I think it's really important for us to go, what? Like, how is drinking this? Because there's a deeper problem underneath and we don't know how to solve it. So we just try to solve it the only way we know how. And with me, with food, for example, what I mentioned, I think in the podcast, but it was really just so symbolic of the time I was invited to speak at Celebrate Recovery during Recovery Month in Findlay, Ohio. And I'm there going to give the talk. I was the keynote speaker. It was the mayor and me, all this. And on the way to the talk, I'm just like shoving pretzels into my mouth, just shoving pretzels into my mouth. and then I pause and I go, you're not even hungry. What is happening? And so that's the pause I think you were talking about, going, what is really, because the pretzels are not the problem. I mean, may that be your worst. It's but in that instance, it's the anxiety underneath, and if I don't learn coping skills on how to deal with the anxiety, with the depression, with the whatever, with the emotional needs that I have that are not being met, because that's what all of it stems from, is you go back into, because pain and trauma, they don't decompose when you bury them, they ferment. And so when we suppress our pain, our hurt from childhood, from adolescence, from all of that, from bad experiences, from trauma, if we just suppress it, it's like taking a beach ball and trying to shove it down. I think it was Gabor Mate who just used that metaphor, and I just loved it. It's like taking a beach ball and shoving it down underwater, and you shove it, and at some point it's either going to implode and it's just going to explode straight up. And that's what happens. And so the problem is not the drinking or the partying or the sex compulsion, which was all of my 20s. It was this need to be loved, and not knowing how to get it. You reach for anything that might give you rest. I don't know how to explain it. Like, you're trying to solve a problem and no one's giving you the tools. And so it's like trying to unscrew a screw with a butter knife, and you're like, freak, this isn't working. Of course it's not, because that's not the right tool. It could work for a little bit. It might get, you might get but it'll frustrate you more. It'll create a whole other problem, and it'll probably ruin your butter knife. But if in that pause we go, what need of mine is not being met? And how can I ask for that need to be met rather than express the unmet need or express the feeling? Like, hold up there, tiger, take a breath and just go, I know I'm talking about adulting, which is hard, but the alternative, but the alternative is way harder. I think the alternative is spending the rest of our lives just feeding that cycle of addiction and compulsive behavior. That's way harder. And so we're back to flipping on the light and seeing the truth. And sometimes for the first time, like, hey, I don't feel loved. I don't feel seen. I don't feel heard. And this is a way for me to either be loved, seen, or heard, or for me to suppress the pain of not being loved, seen, and heard temporarily so that it doesn't hurt so bad. Right. I mean, and that's when people wonder why is someone in such a abusive relationship, or why do they cut, or why do they burn, or what? Because that pain is not as bad as the pain of not having that in your life. I don't know how else to explain it. And so I don't mean to minimize anyone's compulsion or issue and say your eating is not the problem. It's a symptom of a much bigger problem. Like on tour, I started having this really, really terrible pain in my spleen. Like, it was unbearable. I couldn't lift anything. I couldn't bend over. I was just, my talk in Portland, by the time I got to Portland, Oregon, I couldn't even stand up straight. I couldn't lift my books. I had to have some, and there was so much pain. And it was really interesting. Medically, pain in the spleen, there's nothing wrong with the spleen. It's indicative of another problem. There's something wrong with your blood, meaning there's something wrong with, I think it was spinal fluid or some kind of, I don't know. It's just, but it was really interesting because it was like, my spleen, they're like, that's just a symptom. It's indicative of a blood issue. Let's get some blood work done. Because I was like, why are they checking my blood? And it turns out I had no platelets left. And so my spleen was setting off a siren going, hey, there's something off. And so the impulse for me to eat or have sex or whatever impulse was throughout my life or whatever, that was a siren going off. Hey, something is not right. So that's why I don't want to demonize the behavior itself. The behavior itself is a cry for help. It's, let's listen to it. Let's answer that cry. Let's reach out to the person who's doing that. But only when they're ready. Because when you do that before they're ready, when you push something on someone, you just push them away. And that's the exact opposite of what you're trying to do. So you just open up your arms, and when they're ready, you just shine your light. When they're ready, they'll come out of the dark. But if you try to shine the light in their eyes before they're ready, you're just going to blind them. They're just not going to.
I really like that metaphor. I picture like
yeah, just going around with a flashlight. Do you see? It's like, well, now I can't see anything. Now I just see spots. It's like, just be the light, and those who are ready to come out of the dark will come to you. Just like a lighthouse. Be a lighthouse.
Be the flower or be the light. Yeah. Yep. I like what you said about, I used to say underneath any addiction, there is unaddressed pain that just doesn't know how to be touched, processed, and then people sometimes, like what you said, I don't want to demonize I don't want to demonize the behavior, which is, I love that, because a lot of times people feel so shameful about the behavior. And then the old script and old tapes of like, what's wrong with me? And then it's like, if you have this belief system of like, oh, there's something wrong with me, then you have to play that out. And
as
so,
part of the
yeah,
addiction, and then that the shame and
yeah,
the guilt and the blame, it just this self.
yeah,
And so when you remove that shame and guilt, it's like,
mm,
and say, I don't blame you for doing that. You're
mm,
using the only tool you've got. Are you open to other tools? And that's what's fascinating. And even working with people with PTSD, if they are open to imagining a life without it, then they're like, give me the tools, give me the tools and the coping skills I can use in order to make this manageable. Because like depression and anxiety, it's not curable, but they are coping skills. And those who
mm,
are open to it are like, hey, this is something that's in my life and I want to imagine a life without it, or a life where it's manageable. Great. Those are the people we can work with. But when you identify as someone with you identify with your PTSD or with your whatever
yeah,
label you want, and someone says, hey, do you want to imagine a life without it? That person is threatening your identity all of a sudden. And
yeah,
you're going to cling to that identity, that PTSD or whatever it is, because it's part of who you are. You're
yeah,
going to defend it, and you're going
being
to cut
attacked.
ties with the very exactly, because that person is attacking something that you identify. But they're so even with the best intentions, when you come up to someone and you don't know the full story and you try to fix them, you can't
Mm,
fix other people.
yeah,
No one is going to ever let go of something that they still believe has value.
yeah,
No one
exactly.
will ever let go of something that they still believe has value. So when you tell them, why don't you just quit? It's like, you don't know the whole story. And if you only knew probably how badly I wanted to quit, you wouldn't ask me that. But we
Mm,
tend to not ask all the hard questions because that's vulnerable.
mhm,
That puts us in a very uncomfortable place. And we like to come from a place of knowing, as opposed to, hey, I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
mm,
I just think that's so beautiful to show up and
mm,
say, I don't have any answers, but I have a lot of questions without judgment, just curiosity. It's so,
mm,
because oftentimes as they answer your questions, they find the answers for the first time themselves because they have not asked themselves those questions. So
mm,
I don't
mm.
know. There's such a gentle approach to, and I think it's triage in a way, because I'm thinking of like, oh, someone got stabbed with a knife. It's like, oh, just take the knife out. It's like, you need to figure out if, sometimes the fact that the knife is in there is what's keeping the person alive, so
Yeah, from
there's
bleeding out, right?
exactly. If you pull
Yeah.
it out too quickly, if you don't do anything else first, your attempt to help them is what's going to kill them. So
Mhm.
assess the situation. Not everyone needs to have the knife taken out. Not everyone's cut in the same place. Not everyone's bleeding the same. Not easy, Tiger. Just ask the person, do you mind that the knife is there? Have you
Mhm.
tried to take it out? Don't get so hung
Mhm.
up on the who, what, where, when, why. But it's like,
Mhm.
I don't know how else to explain it. I'm reluctant to give a straight answer of this is what I do and this is what you do. It's ask, be gentle.
Yeah. I think that's perfect though,
Okay.
asking questions, because a lot of times these things like belief systems or patterns, behaviors go, for the most part unquestioned, except for
Mhm.
it's like, well, what's wrong with me that I keep doing this? Like again, the gentleness and approaching it in that way allows
Even changing it
spaciousness.
to, why do you keep doing this? Not what's wrong with you. Why do you keep
Yeah.
doing this? But why do you keep doing this?
Mm,
Whatever it is, even if it's something that's wonderful. Why do you get up every morning at 5 a.m. and go to the gym? Nothing wrong with that, but ask yourself. So that way you live in line with intention and you go, I'm
mm,
doing this because this is what gives me purpose. This
mm,
enriches my life. And if you go, why do I keep doing this? And you're like, that's a good question,
mm.
And then it's like, start there. Yeah.
So good questions, good
That's,
questions.
yeah.
Um, so I think as far as questions go, that's most of what I had to discuss with you. And this has been lovely, and getting to know you on a different level and just talk about. Well, actually, there's one more thing that just sort of came up organically. And one thing that you said when you were in my studio, and it was like one of those snapshot moments. And you said something along the lines of unconditional love is presence without judgment.
Love is the absence of judgment. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, yeah, something like that. And that really struck me.
Yeah, because if you think about what's standing between you and being able to love the person in front of you, it's judgment. It's always judgment. Even if that person in front of you is your own reflection. What is standing between you and being able to love the person in front of you? It's judgment. And when you remove judgment, all that's left is love.
Now, you mentioned nonviolent communication, the work of Marshall Rosenberg, which I'm a huge fan of. So I guess maybe my wrap up question is like, how do you use that in your life as far as maybe, you know, because you're a monk, like how do you like assess your own needs and like, you know, make those important and communicate from the space of nonviolent communication? How has that served you?
It has served me well.
Me too.
Boundaries, setting boundaries, addressing boundaries. Not, you know, if someone crosses a boundary but they didn't know it was there, it's pointless to be mad at them, to yell at them, to be angry, because they didn't know it was there. They did nothing wrong, really. Right. If you set a boundary and you communicate that boundary and someone crosses it, it's not because setting a boundary is not about telling other people what they can and cannot do. It's about honoring your own boundaries. So if I say, you know, I don't want to be around alcohol and someone pulls out a drink, they're not doing anything wrong. I'm then in a decision going, do I honor my boundary and say, thank you for a lovely evening, I'm going to go home, you know, and without making it wrong, without making it, it's just, this is my boundary. I'd no longer feel comfortable, safe, fill in the blank, and honoring that. Because if you don't, you're basically saying it's okay for you to, you know, I always say this with a relationship. If someone yells at you and you don't call foul, you're essentially saying it's okay for you to yell at me. So setting boundaries is something we don't just do once. It's constant. And let me rephrase that. Honoring boundaries, meaning honoring our own, because we will constantly be tested. It's trying to answer this as eloquently as I can and skillfully about how I apply these in interpersonal relationships. For example, maybe 5 people in the world have my phone number, for example. And even they know not to ever call me. They always message me first, say, is this a good time to call? Because my phone's always off. I feel really startled if my phone just rings and I don't know who it, like, that's not. And that's my own issue. That's nothing wrong. They just wanted to call and say hi. Great. I'm happy for you. Please message me. I will call you right back. Just don't. And that ties back into valuing time. It's just about articulating, this is my need. This is my quirk. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not embarrassed of it. And I'm no longer going to apologize for it. This is who I am. And
it's good. You know yourself and you communicate. I really admire that about you. You know, like I've worked on boundaries and it's a continual process, as you know. And I really admire that about you. And you know, you don't get the sense of that you're pissed off or you're like, no, this is how it is. And
and there's a way to say what you need to say without rejection. I mean, take this podcast, for example. You've been wanting me to do this since I was in your studio, but I was on tour and I'm like, I don't have a minute for myself. And as we've already discussed in this episode, those minutes for myself are very, very important. And I'm now gearing up to go and do this around New Zealand and Australia and the UK. Like, I'm not going to, and it's like, and you're like, and then you reached out again, like, I really want you on my show. And I'm like, I appreciate that. And I'm not rejecting you. It's like when a friend asks you to help them move and you really don't want to help them move. There's a big gap between saying, okay, I'll help you, and then being resentful, and then saying, no, I'm not going to help you, and just pissing them off. And there's a way to say, you know what? I'm going to show up for an hour and help you pack your kitchen, or I'm not going to show up, but I'll have pizza delivered to your place at noon. There's a big gap between yes and no. And so I didn't say, yes, let's do it tomorrow when you asked me. And I didn't say no. I said, let me look at my schedule and get back to you. And I promise I'm not saying that because I don't want to. I just need to find the right time. And you've been really great and patient, and I appreciate that. But even if you weren't, that has nothing to do with me. Like, if someone gets upset with you when you say no, that doesn't mean you should have said yes. Right? Like,
I want to say, like, say that louder for the people in the back.
For the people in the back. If someone gets mad at you when you say no, that doesn't mean you should have said yes. You know, it's And then for many people pleasers, that's really difficult to digest because all they want to do is please others. And if they say no, they're then going to upset the other person. But that has nothing to do with you if the other person can't accept no for an answer. And oftentimes I say, I don't want to say no, but I'm not fully committed. I need more information. That's a big one for me. I need more information. Hey, do you want to go out to dinner on Tuesday night? I need more information, because what does that mean to you? Because if you're talking about going to eat at 9:00 at night, absolutely not. I'm in bed by then. I don't eat so late. Like, that does not sound great. What are you really asking? Well, I really want to catch up with you. Fantastic. I really want to catch up with you too. I don't think doing it over dinner is the best way to do it, because you eat at 9, I eat at 5. So how about we go on a hike? Well, great. Let's do that. Really asking, what are you really asking? What do you really want out of this interaction?
Right. That's great. That's great communication.
Just finding that gap between yes and no, and meeting people where they are and finding out what is really behind this. I guess I answered your first question with the second answer, but anyway, it's all there. The information is all there. It's just applicable in different ways. Yeah,
that's great. That's great. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on my podcast. And may I ask, is there a way that people can give to you? I know that you have a Patreon. Maybe there's a website that they can go to, if you wouldn't mind mentioning it.
All of my stuff is on BuddhistBootcamp.com. Thank you. And the Buddhist Bootcamp podcast has no advertisements or commercials or sponsors. It's all the work I do in the world, from the prisons to the Veteran Health Administration to mental health associations, schools, you name it. It's all supported by listeners who contribute sometimes as little as $1 a month through patreon.com, because, many people, they don't give because they think, well, I can't help you. I don't have $1,000. I'm like, I never asked for 1,000. Right. It's amazing how much when we all come together, what a big difference we can make. But if everyone says someone else will do it, then it doesn't get done. This whole process has been supported by a wonderful, loving community, and all of my stuff is available on BuddhistBootcamp.com or TimberHawkeye.com. They both go to the same place. The books, the podcasts, the tour information, videos, all of it. Thank you so much for having your platform and reaching your audience and doing the work that you do. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. And maybe we'll catch you on your next book tour. We'll invite you. We'll be sure to invite you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Timber. Have a wonderful day, and namaste, or opposite of namaste.
Aloha.
Super.
Thank you so much for listening. If you want to support the podcast and if it's helping you, please consider writing a review. You can go to iTunes or Google Play, go into the search bar and type in Thrive Yoga Fit Transformational Coaching, scroll down, and you can leave a review. This helps other people to find me, as well as bumps us up in the search ratings. Also, this podcast is sponsor-free, so that means we don't receive anything for doing it. If you feel so inclined and this podcast is helping to support you and you want to return the favor and help to support any production costs of the podcast, feel free to give a donation to a Venmo link, Thrive Yoga Fit, or PayPal, Erin@erincoach.com. If you don't have the means, don't worry about it. We're not going anywhere. You're all good. But if you would like to give back, you can give back in those ways. Last thing, we have a coaching certification coming up, and it's 7 days of an intensive work, followed by a 3-month mentorship. You will not find another teacher that's more passionate and dedicated than I am to my students and their learning, and not just their learning, but the application and how they show up in their life. If you've been listening to this podcast and it's had a huge impact on your life, just imagine what it would be like to spend 7 intensive days with me and then a 3-month mentorship. You can check that out at thriveyogafit.com/coach-certification. Again, thriveyogafit.com/coach-certification. Thank you so much. Namaste.